Single dad Janitor was asked to play piano as a joke, but what he played made even the CEO tear up. "Careful with that cloth," Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "This one has history in its bones." He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, just himself and maybe the Steinway grand piano under his hands, which gleamed like black glass beneath the warm lights of Lexington Hall. Jack Hollis, Janitor, 39. Single dad, war veteran, and invisible man in a suit-and-tie world moved like a shadow through the hushed grandeur of the hall. The gala was still hours away, but already the air buzzed with invisible electricity. Staff bustled inside corridors, clinking glasses, adjusting table linens. The floral team was arranging absurdly expensive white orchids. A violinist tested acoustics. And in the center of it all stood Jack, gently buffing the curved edge of the Steinway with a worn microfiber cloth as if he were handling something sacred. He paused, not because he was finished, but because he wasn't ready to move on. His palm rested lightly on the wood, his eyes far away. "You're talking to furniture again." Jack came a small voice behind him. He turned, smiled. Lena, his 8-year-old daughter, peeked in through the side curtain, cradling her sketchbook to her chest like it held state secrets. Blonde hair in a loose braid, oversized hoodie, and sneakers with worn soles. She wasn't supposed to be here technically, but Jack had made an exception. She'd been quiet all day, and when Lena went too quiet, Jack paid attention. "Furniture," he said. "That's not furniture. That's a cathedral with 88 steps to heaven." Lena giggled softly and sat cross-legged just beyond the light. Her pencil scratched across the page. Jack returned to his work. With one hand he polished the last corner of the piano. With the other he traced a memory. He'd once sat at a piano like this before life turned into bills, overtime, and emergency room visits. Before Lena's mother slipped away on a hospital bed. Before grief became background noise. "Mr. Hollis," a sharp voice snapped from across the stage. Jack looked up. A woman in a dark blazer, clipboard in hand, stood near the entrance, frowning. "Could you please be quick with that? Miss Kingsley will be arriving soon, and everything needs to look immaculate." Jack nodded without speaking. He never did in moments like these. He understood his place. But as he bent down to gather his cleaning supplies, another voice sliced through the air, this one laced with theatrical disdain. "My God, he's caressing it like it's his long-lost lover." The voice belonged to a tall man descending from the VIP balcony. Late 50s, silver hair, Italian shoes. The kind of man who wore smugness like cologne. Langston Gray music critic for the Times and patronizing connoisseur of real talent. A few staff nearby chuckled nervously. Jack didn't look up. He gathered his cloths and brushes, slowly methodically folding them with too much care. Langston continued undeterred. "It's always adorable when the help gets romantic with the decor. What's next?" Vacuuming the carpet with tears in his eyes. More laughter, louder this time. Jack said nothing, but Lena had stopped drawing. Her eyes flicked to her father. She knew that look, his jaw just slightly clenched, the quiet stillness that meant a storm was gathering inside. He picked up his bucket, turned to walk off stage. "Wait," Langston called out, grinning. "Tell me something, Janitor. Do you even know what this is? This instrument you're so reverent with?" Jack finally turned. He looked at Langston, not angry, not offended. Just calm, steady. "Yes," he said. "It's a Steinway Model D. 9 feet long, 12,000 moving parts. The soundboard's made from Sitka spruce grown slow and high for resonance. The rim's made of 17 layers of hard rock maple. The keys, originally ivory, now composite. It costs more than your Mercedes and holds more stories than your column ever will." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Langston blinked. Jack didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked toward the wings. Lena stood quietly wide-eyed. He knelt beside her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. Jack reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a tiny music note charm. He placed it in her palm. "What's this for?" she whispered. "For remembering. he said. That music isn't always played out loud. She clutched it tight. Just then, the grand double doors opened. A wave of voices flooded in. Lights were adjusted. Ushers scurried. The evening star guests arrived, donor celebrities, and, above all, Celia Kingsley. She entered the hall not like a performer, but like someone used to owning rooms just by walking into them. Tailored black jumpsuit, sharp eyes, controlled poise, a woman who had built empires, dissolved boardrooms, and been called both genius and tyrant in the same breath. She scanned the stage eyes, landing briefly on the piano. Then the lingering haze of silence. "Everything ready?" she asked her assistant. "Yes, Miss Kingsley. Final polish just completed." She approached the Steinway, running her fingers over the wood. Then, with a glance toward the wings, she caught sight of Jack. Their eyes met just for a second. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered one breath too long before turning away. Jack stood still, Lena beside him. The gala was about to begin, and no one, not even the woman who owned the stage, knew that the most unforgettable performance of the night wouldn't come from the program. It would come from the shadows, from calloused fingers, from a father with music buried under layers of dust waiting to rise again. "How long do you need to make people forget you're human?" Celia Kingsley asked the question in her mind as she looked around Lexington Hall from the wings. The answer she'd learned was approximately 7 seconds, just enough time to step into a spotlight, smile like you mean it, and pretend the silence in your own chest was elegance, not emptiness. The orchestra tuned softly beneath the murmur of guests arriving. Strings, breath, woodwinds, all aligned to serve the illusion that this night was about harmony, beauty, order. Not business, not control. But for Celia, everything was business, even music. She adjusted the diamond clasp on her cuff and nodded at the event manager. "Tell the quartet to begin on my signal," she said, "and make sure the Langston piece is displayed on every donor's seat. I want them reading his praise before the appetizers." The assistant scurried away. Celia turned back toward the piano, the Steinway that was center stage literally and metaphorically. It was flawless now, polished to a mirror finish, not a single fingerprint on the lid. She could see her own reflection in the curve of the wood. She hated mirrors. Voices rose behind her guests, finding their seats, laughing, clinking glasses. Somewhere in the movement she noticed the janitor again, the one from earlier. He wasn't looking at her. He was helping a young girl find her seat off to the side. His daughter, probably. He bent down and brushed her shoulder with a gentleness that didn't match his rough hands. Celia hesitated. Something about the way he stood, shoulders slightly hunched like he was used to shrinking into the background, but still carried a quiet kind of strength stuck in her mind longer than it should have. Ms. Kingsley Langston Gray appeared beside her, sipping a drink, eyes sharp behind thick designer frames. "Lovely turnout tonight. Impeccable as always." She nodded. "And your review strategically early as always. Well, some of us still understand how timing works in the arts, and how to separate polish from passion." He smirked, unlike our overly sentimental janitor earlier. Celia's gaze flicked toward Langston's drink, then back to his smug face. "You know, Langston," she said smoothly, "sometimes the people closest to the floor hear what no one else does." He blinked. "I'm sorry." "Nothing." She smiled tightly. "Just a passing thought." He chuckled, missing the edge entirely. Backstage, Jack was tucking Lena's coat onto the storage shelf, carefully smoothing out the wrinkles. "You sure you want to stay through the whole concert?" he asked, voice soft. Lena nodded. "I want to hear the piano, when it's not just us." Jack tilted his head. "It's never just us when we play Kiddo." She looked up. "What do you mean?" He paused. "It's like this," he said, searching for the words. "When you play music, real music, it remembers people, places, things you lost, things you hoped for. It's never just fingers on keys. It's everything you've ever felt trying to climb out." Lena didn't answer, but she reached into her sketchbook and tore out the page she'd been drawing. It was the Steinway. And him. Jack took at his throat, tightening. The details were stunning, the way the stage lights hit the piano, the curve of his shoulder leaning toward the keys. "You see more than most people," he said. "You hear more than most people," she whispered. As the gala progressed, the MC took the stage. The lights dimmed. The air shifted. Celia stood just behind the curtains listening to the speech being delivered in her name. And of course, none of this would be possible without the vision and generosity of Miss Celia Kingsley, whose dedication to music education has brought us all together tonight. Applause. Celia stepped forward. Spotlight. Smile. Breathe. "Thank you," she began, voice even and clear. "This hall has always been a place for extraordinary sound. But tonight, we are not just celebrating the notes we hear, we are celebrating the people who make them possible." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "Talent," she continued, "doesn't always come with pedigree. It doesn't announce itself in the right clothes or the right accent or the right address. Sometimes it hides, waiting for a moment to be seen." Her eyes landed just for a heartbeat on Jack sitting in the shadows. Then she moved on. "Tonight's proceeds will go toward providing instruments and instruction to public schools across the state, because brilliance belongs everywhere, not just here." Thunderous applause, standing ovation. But Jack, he didn't stand. He just sat there, a quiet statue in the glow of a moment not meant for him. Backstage, after the second performance, Jack stood near the corridor exit waiting for Lena. She had gone to the restroom with a volunteer. Langston passed him again, clearly 2 drinks deeper than before. "You know," he slurred slightly, "you've got a lot of nerve putting on that poetic act earlier." Jack didn't respond. Langston leaned in. "You think touching a piano gives you insight, that it gives you worth?" Jack turned slowly. Calm. Unshaken. "No," he said. "I think being able to walk past one without ever hearing it, that's what takes something away from you." Langston blinked. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. Jack walked away. Back in the audience, Celia sat down beside the Steinway during intermission alone. Her fingers hovered over the keys, not pressing, just remembering. Long ago, before mergers and IPOs, she'd played Bach in competitions. Her mother had cut every rosebush in the garden the day she lost a state final. She never touched a piano again after that. Until now. She pressed one note, C sharp, pure and ringing. She closed her eyes. Outside, Lena returned to find Jack waiting. She slipped her small hand into his calloused one. "Are you sad?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No, sweet pea. I'm just remembering how loud silence can be." The scent of fresh varnish and lilies hung thick in the air as the hall began to fill with velvet and perfume. High heels clicked across marble, laughter rang beneath chandeliers, and the chandeliers themselves shimmered like they had been waiting all year for this one perfect night. Jack stood at the edge of the stage, a small cloth folded neatly in his hand. The gala hadn't started yet, but the VIPs were drifting in early, those who loved being seen more than seeing. Celia was mingling with donors near the back, her posture poised, her smile effortless. He turned back to the Steinway. It was already clean. He knew that. But he didn't touch the piano out of necessity. He touched it like someone visiting a gravestone. Tender, familiar, sacred. His thumb moved along the wood grain, and for a moment he forgot the lights, the crowd, the ridiculous tuxedo someone had hung over a spotlight as a joke. He remembered his wife's voice. "You always play like the keys owe you an apology," she used to tease. He had loved that. And then, just as his fingertips paused over middle C, a loud voice pierced the quiet of the stage. "Well, well. If it isn't Beethoven with a mop." There was laughter scattered unsure. Jack straightened cloth still in hand. Langston Gray stood near the orchestra pit holding a champagne flute like it was a scepter. He had his jacket slung over one shoulder and a knowing smirk on his lips. Jack didn't move. "Tell me," Langston said, taking a step closer, his voice now loud enough to draw more attention. "Do you prefer Brahms when you buff the pedals? Or is Chopin your go-to when scrubbing stains?" More laughter now. Fuller. Some polite, some mean. Jack's eyes flicked toward Lena seated near the back of the hall. She was watching him, small hands wrapped tightly around her sketchbook. He looked back at the piano. Then at Langston. "I'm just doing my job," Jack said quietly. Langston scoffed. "Oh, come now. That's not what I saw earlier. You were looking at it like it whispered secrets. Or maybe you thought it'd whisper yours." A few people chuckled. A few didn't. Celia, standing off to the side with a glass of red in hand, turned slightly, her expression unreadable. Jack breathed in. He could feel something swell in his chest, anger, shame, memory. It was hard to tell them apart anymore. He took a step forward, his boots echoing gently against the polished stage floor. Then he spoke, not loud, but with weight. "You ever see a soldier pick up a rifle he hasn't touched in years?" he asked. Langston frowned, caught off guard. "First thing he does." Jack continued, voice steady. "He checks it, wipes it down. He doesn't load it, doesn't fire it, just holds it. Because sometimes what you used to carry still carries something in you." The hall went silent. Jack gently placed the cloth into the bucket, stood tall, and turned to leave the stage. But Langston, not done yet, called out with a mocking cheer, "Maybe you should play something tonight, Janitor. I mean, if the piano means that much, give us a little tune. Twinkle, twinkle, perhaps." A few snorts, nervous giggles. Jack paused mid-step, and in that pause, something sharp shifted in the air. Celia moved. She didn't say a word, just stepped forward and placed her wineglass down on the edge of the stage. A few people turned toward her instinctively. She met Jack's eyes, calm, focused. She didn't look amused, or embarrassed, or superior. She looked thoughtful. Jack gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone else, and walked off the stage with quiet dignity. In the corridor backstage, Lena approached him, clutching her sketch pad. "Why do people laugh when something's not funny?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Jack knelt down to her level. "Because," he said, "sometimes they're afraid of what they don't understand. And sometimes they're afraid of remembering what they gave up." She stared at him. "Did you give it up?" Jack hesitated. "I didn't have a choice," he said. "But maybe. I didn't fight hard enough to keep it." He ruffled her hair gently. "I'm okay," he added, more for her than for himself. Lena didn't reply. She just leaned her forehead against his chest and stayed there a moment longer than usual. Back in the hall, Langston retook his seat, still chuckling quietly. Celia stood near the edge of the aisle, arms crossed, her gaze resting once more on the Steinway. She remembered her own mother's voice. Winning isn't about playing better. It's about playing so they don't question your worth. And yet, there was something about the janitor. His words weren't just clever, they were true. There was an ache behind them that she recognized in her own mirror. She walked up to the piano. Slowly. She let her fingers drift over the keys, not playing, just feeling the texture, the temperature, the quiet hum beneath the wood. She pressed a soft note F. It rang, clean and bright. And for the first time in years, Celia Kingsley felt like the instrument was listening back. Jack stood in the service hallway, hands pressed against the cool tiles as if the building itself might steady him. Outside, applause rolled through the grand hall like thunder across a valley. The second performance had ended. Laughter returned, champagne flowed, the air was filled with celebration. But inside him, only silence. Not the comforting kind. The kind that presses in on your ribs and whispers you don't belong here. He should leave. Just grab Lena, clock out early, and disappear the way ghosts are supposed to. He'd done it 100 times in other rooms, other lives. Being invisible was a survival skill, maybe even a talent. But then, Dad Lena's voice was soft, but it carried. He turned. She stood at the end of the hallway, small and still holding his old leather-bound notebook, the one he used to jot musical ideas in, now worn from years of disuse. He hadn't seen her take it, hadn't even realized she knew where he kept it. "I found this in your locker," she said. "I thought maybe you forgot what was in it." Jack walked slowly toward her, gently taking the notebook in his hands. The cover was cracked, the edges curled, but when he opened it, the music stared back at him. Bars of melody, half-finished phrases. One page marked Lena's theme, unfinished. He blinked hard. "Where did you learn to be this brave?" he asked. Lena shrugged. "From you. Except when you forget you are." He knelt down beside her. "I don't want you to see me like this," he said. "I don't want you to remember tonight for the wrong reasons." She tilted her head. "I won't remember what they said. I'll remember that you stood there proud, like you knew something they didn't." Her words hit him harder than Langston's ever could. And then she added almost shyly, "You still love the piano, don't you?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the notebook in his hand, then back at her. "I love it," he said finally, "the way some people love someone they lost." Quietly, from across the street, never getting too close. Lena thought about that. Then, with more courage than her years should allow, she said, "Maybe it's time to cross the street." Back in the hall, Celia sipped from a fresh glass of wine, watching as Langston recounted his piano comedy to a circle of eager socialites. She wasn't listening. Her mind kept drifting back to the janitor's eyes. Not humiliated, not wounded, just anchored, like a tree refusing to bend no matter how strong the wind. She admired that, even envied it. She stepped away from the crowd and walked to the edge of the stage. The lights above were soft, now set for ambiance between sets. A technician adjusted cables nearby. She looked again at the piano, and this time she sat. Only for a moment. She lifted the fallboard, laid her fingers gently on the keys, and played a single chord, a minor. It rang through the empty stage like a secret told to no one. "Didn't expect to see you try that," a voice said behind her. Celia turned. Jack stood just off stage, arms crossed, Lena beside him. Celia smiled faintly. "Still fits like an old coat, doesn't it?" Jack stepped forward. "Funny thing about coats," he said. "You forget how warm they are until someone hands them back." They stood there in a moment that balanced between small talk and something deeper. "You didn't have to step in earlier," he said, his voice low. "But you did." Celia glanced at Lena, then back to him. She was watching, and so was I. Jack nodded. "Then let me ask you something." She raised an eyebrow. "Why does someone like you—" He gestured to the room, the gowns, the acclaim still sit alone at a piano. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. "Because applause is loud," she said. "But it never drowns out regret." Jack swallowed hard. "I used to think music was something I left behind," he said. "Turns out it's just been waiting in the quiet." They stood silently, the piano between them. Then Lena broke it. "Dad," she said, tugging his sleeve, "do you think you could show me the piece you used to play for Mom? The one you said was too sad for now." Jack looked at her, then at Celia. Maybe, he murmured, "It's sad, because I never played it all the way through." Celia stood up slowly, gestured toward the bench. "Then finish it," she said, voice gentle but firm. "You don't owe anyone a show. Just finish it for her. For you." "For her," she nodded toward Lena. Jack hesitated. Then he moved. He took a breath, lowered himself onto the bench, adjusted the seat like instinct, and let his fingers hover over the keys. For a moment, nothing. Then, music. Not flawless, not rehearsed, but honest. A lullaby wrapped in pain and hope, full of pauses that spoke louder than the notes themselves. Celia watched something old and aching unfolding in her chest. Lena sat cross-legged nearby, still eyes wide. And when Jack lifted his hands off the final chord, the note hung in the air like a held breath that finally gently exhaled. The third act of the gala began with precision and glitter. A mezzo-soprano sang Mozart as wine glasses clinked. The stage shimmered under amber lighting, and the chandeliers above caught every note like constellations collecting stars. Jack stood in the shadows, backstage, arms crossed over his maintenance vest. Lena sat beside him, her head resting lightly against his elbow. She hadn't spoken in 10 minutes, but her hand was wrapped tight around his little fingers, laced into his calloused ones. He should have gone home by now. Should have slipped away quietly after finishing his shift. But he didn't. Something tethered him there. Maybe the music, maybe that unfinished feeling from earlier. Or maybe it was the way Celia had looked at him while he played. Not with pity, not even with surprise, but with recognition. She saw him. And that was a dangerous thing. On stage, the MC returned with practiced charisma. And now he beamed before our final performance of the evening. We'd like to offer something spontaneous. Jack's shoulders tensed. The man smiled wide. Sometimes the most interesting music isn't on the program, it's in the room. Whispers fluttered through the audience like wind through leaves. And then came the voice that Jack had started to expect like a bad weather forecast. Langston Gray. He stood near the edge of the orchestra pit, eyes glittering with cruel delight. "I propose a little experiment," he said, raising his glass. "Our friend from earlier, the janitor, seems to have quite the poetic soul, maybe even a musical one." Jack went still. Langston turned to the crowd. "Wouldn't it be something if he graced us with a few notes? I mean, he clearly knows how to handle a Steinway." A few polite chuckles. Celia, from her front row seat, did not smile. "Langston," she began, warning in her voice. But he pressed forward, his tone syrupy with false charm. "Come now," he said, turning directly to Jack. "You spoke so eloquently earlier, why not let your hands do the talking now? Give us a taste of that janitorial genius. Who knows, perhaps you'll surprise us." Laughter again. Bigger this time. Some mocking, some awkward, most unsure. Jack could feel the spotlight swinging toward him even before the beam found his face. Lena sat up straight beside him. "Dad," she whispered. He looked down. Her face was pale, eyes wide. The moment slowed, stretched. In another life he would have declined politely. Let it roll off. Dignity intact. Pride protected. But this time something in him burned. He stood. The room gasped, then hushed. He walked slowly, each step echoing louder than applause ever could. When he reached the piano, he didn't sit right away. He turned to face the crowd. "I didn't come here to perform," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the silence. "I came to clean the floors, empty the trash, and make sure no one tripped over a broken chair. That's what I'm paid for." A nervous laugh somewhere in the back. He waited, then added, "But sometimes life doesn't care what you're paid for. Sometimes it just dares you to remember who you used to be." Celia leaned forward slightly. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Jack looked down at the keys. The fallboard was already open. The piano waited like an old friend, unsure of how to start the conversation. He sat, not like a showman, like a man returning home. He placed his fingers gently on the keys, not playing, just touching, feeling the old weight of ivory under muscle and memory. Then he looked up right at Langston. "Twinkle, twinkle," you said. Jack asked, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Sorry to disappoint." And then he began. The first note was soft, not shy, just honest. A single G suspended like breath. Then came the Cascade Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It rose from the stage like smoke from a candle just blown out, fragile, curling, then catching wind. His fingers moved not with speed but with certainty. The kind of certainty you can't fake or fabricate. The kind born from long nights, lost love, and the need to hold on to something that won't walk out the door. The audience, expecting a joke, froze. There was no joke here. Only music. Real. Raw. Reckless in its vulnerability. Celia pressed one hand to her chest. Langston had gone still, glass suspended midair. Lena's sketchbook slipped from her lap pages, fluttering to the floor. Jack played like a man who had lived each note before he ever touched a key, like someone who didn't just remember the music but had bled through it. The melody built. Storms of arpeggios, followed by sudden tenderness, a cry answered by a lullaby strength chased by surrender. And somewhere between measures the room changed. People stopped seeing a janitor. They started seeing a man, a father, a survivor, a musician. The final chord rang out and held a shimmering echo suspended in stunned silence. Then, nothing. No movement, no breath. The kind of hush that happens after lightning strikes and the world waits to see what's left standing. And then a single clap. From the front row, Celia Kingsley, on her feet. Others followed. Slowly then, all at once. An ovation, not of politeness, but of awe. Jack stood slowly. He didn't bow, just looked out at them, this sea of people who had misjudged him, and nodded. Then he turned, picked up his cloth from the side of the piano, and walked off the stage. He didn't need their applause. He already had what mattered. Lena's eyes, filled with tears and pride, met his at the edge of the stage. She mouthed one word, "Dad," and that was everything. The final note was still echoing like a ghost through the rafters when Jack stepped away from the piano. He didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply nodded once like a man closing a long unfinished chapter and walked into the shadows. But the silence refused to leave. It clung to the corners of the grand hall. It shimmered across the polished floor like the remnants of a dream no one wanted to wake from. And then applause. Tentative at first, a single pair of hands, then another, then a roar. Celia rose first, not as a sponsor, not as a billionaire, as a witness. She clapped with both hands slowly at first, then fiercely like the rhythm itself could pin the truth to the walls. Langston didn't move. He sat, stone-faced glass still in hand, staring at the bench Jack had vacated. His smirk had vanished. In its place, disbelief, and something dangerously close to respect. Others stood, and then more, until the hall itself felt like it was breathing, rising in unison, awakened by something they hadn't expected. A janitor had just made the world feel again. Backstage. Jack leaned against a wall, eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in long measured breaths, but his hands still trembled slightly. Not from nerves, from release. That performance had been a letting go, a reckoning with every version of himself he had buried under survival. Footsteps approached. He opened his eyes. It was Celia. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him like she was still putting together what she had seen. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Where the hell have you been hiding?" Jack gave a small dry smile. Under utility closets, behind broken vending machines, between rent checks. She stepped closer. That wasn't just music out there. That was... She stopped searching. He finished for her. Grief and hope. In the same breath, she exhaled. Exactly. They stood in a long moment of silence. No pretense, no masks. Celia crossed her arms. "When you played, I didn't see a janitor. I didn't even see a musician. I saw someone who's lived through fire and walked out with the melody." Jack looked down at his hands. "Funny," he said. "That piece used to scare me. Too exposed, too vulnerable. Now, it feels like home." Then he looked up, gaze steady. It only took losing everything else for it to sound honest. Celia didn't respond, but her eyes shimmered just briefly. In the audience, Lena clutched her sketchbook with both hands. Her drawing of Jack, drawn from earlier that night, was now surrounded by a halo of musical notes. She had scribbled something beneath it. People don't always know what they're looking at, until it sings. She smiled. She had known, all along. Later that night, when most guests had left and the lights were dimmed to their after-party glow, Jack walked back out onto the empty stage. No audience, No spotlight, just him and the piano. Celia followed heels soft against the wood. "You didn't tell me where you trained," she said. "I didn't." He agreed. She waited. He sighed. "Juilliard, for a time, until my wife passed. After that, I couldn't touch a piano without feeling like I was betraying her memory." Celia swallowed. What was her name? Rachel. What did she sound like? He smiled, eyes far away. She sounded like sunrise, soft and certain. Celia stepped forward, her voice lower now. "You didn't betray her. You brought her back tonight. We all heard it." Jack looked at her and something in his chest cracked open. He didn't cry, but his silence thundered. A moment passed, then another. "You should play again," Celia said, "for more than just this stage." Jack chuckled. "You offering me a record deal now?" She shook her head, smiling. "No, I'm offering you a platform. Real ones, school programs, recital series. People need to hear what music sounds like when it's not chasing applause." He stared at her. "And what do you need?" he asked gently. She looked taken aback. "I mean, you're offering me a stage," he continued. "What's the part of you that still needs one?" Celia's smile faded. She looked away. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe I just want to believe that art can still come from truth, not branding." Jack nodded slowly. "That," he said, "is the most honest thing I've heard all night." As the final staff began shutting down the venue, Lena ran up the aisle, her shoes scuffing against the carpet. "Dad?" she called. "They want a picture of you at the piano." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because," she said simply, "they finally see you." Jack looked at Celia. She smiled. "Told you." That night, as they walked to the car under a sky full of city stars, Lena reached for his hand. "You think Mom heard you?" she asked. Jack squeezed her fingers gently. "No doubt," he said. She probably rolled her eyes and said, "Finally." They both laughed. And as they drove off, the concert hall behind them slowly faded from view. But the music lingered. For the first time in its storied history, Lexington Hall didn't know what to do with itself. The guests who had arrived in sequined gowns and bespoke suits, who had practiced their smiles and perfected their small talk, now sat in quiet clusters like survivors of something sacred. Conversations were low, careful. Laughter, once scattered like glitter, had taken on a softer tone. Jack Hollis, the janitor, had left the stage hours ago, but his music hadn't. It still lived in the lighting rafters, in the wood grain of the Steinway, in the stunned quiet that had followed his final chord. Mrs. Evelyn Ashcroft, a widow and lifelong patron of the arts, wiped her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I haven't cried during a performance since my husband passed," she whispered. And that man played like he was holding someone's memory in his hands. A young violinist near the punch table stared at his instrument case with new reverence. "I've been playing technique," he muttered, but that was soul. In the far corner, Langston Gray sat stiffly staring into a drink he hadn't touched. The man who built his career on dissecting music with clinical brilliance now found himself without a single articulate thought, and that infuriated him. "He's untrained," he muttered to no one in particular. "Raw, emotionally indulgent." But the words tasted hollow. Because the truth was, he'd been moved. Wounded, even. Not by flaws, but by something too honest to refute. A janitor had just made the most brilliant thing Langston had heard in 20 years sound forgettable by comparison. He set the glass down and left without another word. Meanwhile, back in the wings, Jack sat on a folding chair, elbows resting on his knees, staring at his hands like they didn't belong to him. They had betrayed him tonight, not by failing, but by remembering. The way they'd moved without instruction, how every tremor became expression, how pain had leaked out of his fingertips and into the world. He felt both exposed and relieved, like someone who had shouted a confession into a canyon and heard it echoed back with applause. Lena appeared beside him, clutching 2 cups of apple juice like trophies. "They ran out of water," she said, "but I got us the next best thing." Jack took the cup and clinked it gently against hers. To what she asked. He looked at her eyes, soft. To the truth. Finally, not hiding. Across the hall, Celia Kingsley sat alone. Her stilettos kicked off her feet, curled under her on the velvet bench where she'd once given her first public recital. She'd meant to stay only a moment, but that moment had stretched into stillness. She could still feel his music. Not just hear it. Feel it. There had been a moment in the ballade about 3/4 through where the phrasing had changed ever so slightly. A delay. A pull. Not technical. Personal. And in that pause she had recognized something she thought she'd buried long ago, longing. Not for fame, not even for music, but for meaning, for authenticity, for the raw ache of truth unvarnished. She rose slowly and made her way toward the backstage area, weaving through guests who parted instinctively to let her pass. Jack looked up as she approached. "You're barefoot," he said, managing a small smile. Celia shrugged. "Turns out stilettos aren't ideal for soul-searching." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, what happens now?" She sat on a nearby stool, meeting his gaze. "That depends," she said. "Are you willing to be seen?" His brow furrowed. Celia leaned forward slightly. "You've lived years in the shadows, in service, in silence. Tonight you showed them who you are. But it doesn't end here, Jack." She paused. "The world doesn't need another flawless performance. It needs proof that beauty can come from pain and still choose to heal. You are that proof." He swallowed hard. "I'm no one," he said. "I'm a single dad who cleans floors and prays the rent doesn't go up." Celia's voice softened. "You're a man who turned grief into music, who raised a daughter with kindness, who played Chopin like a prayer. That's not no one. That's the kind of man this world forgets to see until it can't look away." A long silence passed between them. Then Jack spoke, voice quieter. "Why are you doing this?" She hesitated, and then, for the first time, let the mask slip. "Because I used to play," she said, "before the boardrooms, before the headlines. I used to play for myself, but I let them take it from me. And tonight, you gave it back." Jack looked at her like he was seeing something fragile under armor. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. She smiled. The best gifts are unintentional. That night, as the gala finally emptied and the final lights dimmed, Celia walked Jack and Lena to the front steps of Lexington Hall. The city was quieter than usual. Lena hugged her sketchbook to her chest. "Will you really help my dad play again?" she asked Celia. Celia crouched down to Lena's level, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I won't help him," she said. "I'll stand back and let him remind the world." Lena beamed. Jack stared at the sky for a moment, searching for something among the stars. Then he turned back, his voice full but steady. "I think it's time I stopped surviving and started living again." Celia nodded. "Then let's make sure the world is listening." The following morning, the city forgot. It went back to honking horns, bitter coffee, and calendars full of meetings that rarely meant anything. But inside the quiet rehearsal studio at the Lexington Foundation building, something real was unfolding, note by note. Jack sat at the baby grand in the corner, not playing, just resting his hands there like he was waiting for permission from the past. Celia stood by the large windows watching sunlight spill through glass like warm milk. She wore a navy blouse tucked into slate trousers, professional composed, but her bare feet were folded beneath her, a silent rebellion against formality. Neither of them had spoken for a while. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was earned. The kind of silence you only share with people who know how to listen. "You didn't bring Lena today," Celia said finally. Jack smiled. "She's at school. Told her she can't be skipping math just because her dad's a concert legend now." Celia smirked. "Smart kid." He nodded, eyes still on the keys. "Smarter than me most days." Another pause. Then Celia asked quietly, "Do you miss her?" Jack blinked. She didn't clarify. She didn't have to. He leaned back from the piano and folded his arms, the air shifting between them. "Every morning," he said. "It's the first thing I feel before I open my eyes. The ache. Not just of her being gone, but of how fast it all happened." He exhaled slowly. Rachel and I met at a piano bar. She hated classical music, said it made her feel like she had to sit up straight. But the way she listened, you'd swear she'd grown up in Vienna. She taught me how to laugh mid-phrase, how to play with joy again. We used to talk about raising Lena with music in her bones, not just her ears. He looked down at his hands, but she didn't make it past the delivery room. Celia didn't speak. Her throat tightened. Jack's voice softened. I couldn't touch the piano after that. For months, even seeing it made me sick. I'd hear a chord and feel like I was betraying her. So I boxed it up, sold everything, took the first job I could find, fixed floors, cleaned bathrooms. Nobody expects anything from a janitor. That was the point. But music stayed in your hands, Celia whispered. Jack nodded. Like a scar. He turned his head toward her. You know, he said people think silence is absence, but sometimes it's full of everything you're too scared to say. Celia stepped closer. My silence wasn't grief, she said. It was fear. Jack met her eyes. I was a prodigy, she said simply. Parents mortgaged everything to buy me a piano. I was winning competitions by 9, playing with orchestras by 12. But every note I played felt like I was earning love that could be taken back. She walked to the piano bench and sat beside him, her tone quieter now. I lost a major competition at 16. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. My father suggested business school. I never played again after that. Not until last night. Jack's gaze softened. And how did it feel? He asked. Celia looked at the keys, touched a single D with her finger, like remembering who I was before I started trying to impress ghosts. They sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was healing. On the wall near the piano, a small plaque read, "In memory of moments that almost happened." Jack nodded toward it. "That's cruelly accurate," he said. Celia glanced at it and smiled faintly. "That's why I had it made," she said. "Every donor wanted a quote from a composer. I chose the truth." She turned to him. "I want to fund a series," she said. "Not just galas. Something real. Recitals in underserved schools, veteran centers, homeless shelters. Music not as performance but as presence." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And you want me to lead it," she said. "To teach, to play. To help others who thought they had to bury their gifts just to survive." He leaned back, hands clasped. "Celia." "I'm not a symbol." "No," she said. "You're a mirror. People see you and realize they still have time." Jack looked away, emotion tightening his jaw. "You think they'll listen to someone like me?" She didn't hesitate. They already did. The door creaked open and Lena peeked inside, backpack slung over one shoulder. "I told her she could meet you here after school," Jack said. "Hope that's okay." Celia smiled warmly. "Of course." Lena stepped into the room and marched toward the piano like it was her birthright. "Did you play?" she asked Celia. "Not yet," Celia replied. Lena patted the bench. "There's still time." Jack laughed. "She's very persuasive. She gets it from someone," Celia said. Lena hopped onto the bench between them and pointed at the keys. "Show me something sad," she said, "but the kind that gets better at the end." Jack and Celia exchanged a glance, and then, side by side, they began to play. A simple duet, a lullaby reborn. And in that quiet studio, 3 lives became a single harmony. The flyer was simple. No flashy design, no gilded fonts, just a cream-colored background, black serif text, and a small piano icon in the bottom corner. The Listening Room series. Real music, real stories, real people. featuring Jack Hollis. It appeared on coffee shop bulletin boards, library windows, and tucked into PTA newsletters across the borough. And it worked. Not because of marketing, because people had been waiting, aching for something real. The first recital wasn't held in a concert hall. It was in a high school gym. The folding chairs creaked. The stage lights flickered. One of the mics didn't work. A toddler dropped her pacifier halfway through the prelude, and someone's phone rang with a Taylor Swift ringtone in the third movement. But no one left, because Jack didn't just play. He told the music's story and his. He opened with a short piece by Debussy, then spoke softly into the mic. I used to believe music was only meant for perfect places. Steinway's tuxedos, pin-drop silence. But I've learned something truer. Music belongs anywhere pain has lived and anywhere healing might begin. In the second row, a teenage boy wiped his eyes and didn't pretend it was allergies. Celia stood near the side door, watching it all unfold. She wore no blazer tonight, just jeans and a black blouse sleeves rolled to the elbow. There was a different energy in her now, not polished, but present. After the performance, people lined up to shake Jack's hand to thank him. A woman in scrubs whispered, "My son hasn't spoken in a month, but he asked what that second piece was called. A war veteran said I haven't felt still like that since before Afghanistan." Jack smiled, gracious and stunned. He wasn't used to being seen. Celia walked up behind him just as the last few people exited. "You're getting quite the following," she teased. He chuckled. "Still doesn't feel real." She tilted her head. "Want to know what I think?" Jack turned toward her, eyebrows raised. "I think she said this is the first time in a long time you're not hiding behind someone else's silence." He nodded slowly, then added, "And I think you're not hiding either." She didn't deny it. The next few weeks moved like a slow sunrise, gentle but steady. Jack played at a senior center in Queens where an elderly woman with early Alzheimer's recited the lyrics to a song her late husband used to sing. She hadn't spoken in days before that. He played at a veteran support group where men who hadn't cried in years sat with their heads bowed, shoulders shaking not from weakness but from permission. He began teaching piano at a public school on Thursdays. Every lesson ended the same way with the words, "Play it like it matters." One afternoon after a lesson, Jack found Celia waiting outside the school. She was leaning against her car sunglasses tucked into her collar holding 2 iced coffees. "What's this?" he asked. "A bribe," she said. "I need you to come with me." He sipped. "This bribe tastes a lot like my favorite coffee." She winked. "I do my research." They drove in companionable silence for a while, winding through side streets until they reached a quiet brick building tucked between brownstones. Celia parked and turned off the engine. Jack looked at her. "What is this?" She reached for the door handle. "Come see." Inside was a dusty, disused room, once a chapel, now forgotten. But at the center sat a baby grand piano, its lid closed, waiting. Jack stepped inside slowly. The room was bathed in soft amber light through stained glass windows. Dust motes swirled like snow. Celia watched him take it in. "This was the first place I ever performed solo," she said. "I was 10, terrified, but I remember how it felt when the first note rang out, like the world stopped judging." Jack looked around. "What happened to this place? Budget cuts. The community music program dissolved. The piano hasn't been played in years." Jack walked to it, ran his fingers gently across the closed lid. Celia's voice was softer now. "I want this to be your space. Yours and Lena's. A room for lessons, rehearsals, even recordings if you want. I've already spoken with the foundation board. They'll back it." Jack turned to her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I can't repay you for this," he said. "You don't have to." He shook his head. "No, I mean it. This is more than generosity. This is a second chance." Celia smiled, small and full of grace. "Exactly. That's the point." He walked slowly to the bench, lifted the lid, and placed his hands on the keys. The first note echoed like a prayer through the forgotten room. He looked up at her. "You sure the ghosts here are friendly?" Celia smiled back. "I brought one of my own. I think they'll get along." Later that evening, as the sky turned navy and the street lamps blinked to life, they sat side by side on the front steps of the building. Jack sipped the last of his coffee. Celia leaned back on her palms. "You know, he said I spent years thinking my life had already peaked. Like love purpose, all of it was something I already lost." He looked at her. "But lately, it feels like the story didn't end. It just paused." Celia's eyes softened. "Sometimes the best songs don't resolve right away." Jack smiled. "And sometimes," he added, "they end up in a better key than you started." She laughed low and warm, and in that moment the city around them didn't feel so loud, because for two people who had once been lost in the margins, the music had finally brought them back to the center. Together. It was the kind of afternoon that sneaks up on you, cloudless, breezy, soft, with the hush of early spring. Jack stood by the window of the old chapel now, their music room tuning a dusty, upright piano Celia had rescued from a community auction. The keys were chipped, the hammers stiff, but it had character like most things worth keeping. Celia was kneeling beside a bookshelf rearranging old binders filled with sheet music. Lena was at the far end of the room, humming to herself while sketching a scene of Jack teaching a class full of kids. Every now and then, Celia would glance over at Jack, his hands gentle on the strings, brow furrowed and concentration sleeves rolled up. The kind of man who could build a home out of silence, then fill it with music. "I haven't seen you this focused since the fire alarm went off during the gala," she teased. Jack chuckled, not looking up. That was focus born of panic. She smirked. "So is half of corporate America." He adjusted a tuning peg and tapped a middle C. "Still sharp." "I used to fix pianos for money in college," he said. "Couldn't afford lessons, so I traded repairs for practice time." Celia stood and dusted off her hands. "So, you've always been building things with your hands?" Jack shrugged. "It's what I do. If it's broken, I try to listen." She tilted her head. "You listen to things differently, don't you?" He looked up now. "I listen to what's not being said." The air shifted. Their eyes met and held for a heartbeat too long. Later that evening, after Lena had gone home with Jack's neighbor Celia, lingered. They sat side by side on the old piano bench sipping tea from mismatched mugs. Jack looked down at the keys. "You know, he said I used to think playing again would feel like betrayal." Celia turned to him. "Of her?" He nodded. "But I've started to realize something. Maybe playing again doesn't mean I'm letting go. Maybe it means I'm remembering differently." He looked at her, voice quieter now. "Grief used to feel like the price I paid to keep her close. But now it feels like the soil something new could grow from." Celia didn't speak. Instead, she reached for his hand. Slowly, not dramatically, like someone placing their palm on a quiet truth. Jack didn't flinch. He looked down at their hands, then up at her. "You keep doing that," he murmured. "Doing what, catching me mid-sentence? I didn't even know I was speaking." She smiled. "And you keep doing this," she said. "What, reminding me who I was before I got good at pretending I wasn't lonely." They stayed that way for a long while, hands entwined over quiet keys, the city dimming outside. No declarations, no grand gestures, just the slow rhythm of trust forming between two hearts that thought they were finished writing music. The next morning, Jack woke up early. The air in his apartment was still. Lena was asleep in the next room. He walked to his small kitchen, poured a mug of coffee, and sat at the dining table with his old leather-bound music journal. He flipped through sketches of melodies, half-finished songs, and annotations in faded ink. On the last page, blank until now, he wrote a new title, Second Movement. Below it, just one line of music, gentle, unresolved waiting. That evening, Celia invited him to her apartment for dinner. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a minimalist two-bedroom tucked above a bookstore in Brooklyn Heights. Wooden floors, old Radiators books stacked in corners like furniture. Jack looked around, surprised. "I pictured you in a glass box with views of Manhattan." She smirked. "I spend my days being watched. I come here to disappear." He looked at the space warm, lived-in real. "You disappear beautifully," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You always talk like that, only when I'm not thinking too hard." They ate on the balcony, laughing about Lena's latest drawing a cartoon of Jack in a cape labeled Maestro Dad, then fell into comfortable silence. Celia rested her head on her folded arms. "You know what I miss most about music?" He waited. The part right before the first note. She lifted her eyes to meet his. That stillness. Full of what could be. Jack smiled. "I think we're in that part right now." When he walked her to the door later that night, she didn't say goodbye. She just leaned in, rested her forehead lightly against his chest, and whispered, "Don't disappear on me." Jack pressed a kiss to the top of her head and replied, voice steady, "I'm done hiding. Especially from you." That night, Jack sat at his old keyboard after Lena had gone to bed. He didn't practice. He played. For the first time without guilt, without fear, and with the sound of something beginning. A second movement, but this time not played alone. The evening air was soft with promise, the kind that only arrives when spring has fully let go of winter. Lanterns twinkled gently above the courtyard of the old chapel, now restored its brick walls wrapped in ivy and light. Folding chairs lined the space rows filled with neighbors, friends, students, people who had once come to listen and stayed to belong. Tonight was the final recital of the Listening Room series. Not the end of the music, but a celebration of how far it had carried them. At the edge of the crowd, Jack adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal blazer. He hadn't worn one in years, but Lena insisted. "You look like a real music man, Dad," she said earlier, tugging at the lapel with pride. He'd only smiled, unable to speak, past the warmth blooming in his chest. Beside him, Celia stood in a soft navy dress, her hand tucked into his. She didn't need to say anything. The calm in her presence said enough. From the small stage, a young girl, a student from Jack's Thursday class, bowed after finishing a delicate piece by Chopin. The audience erupted into gentle applause. Jack leaned down to Lena, who was seated in the front row. "You nervous?" She grinned. "Not at all." He arched a brow. "Really?" she whispered. "I've got two of the bravest people I know sitting right here." "I'll be fine." Then she stepped onto the stage carrying nothing but a sketchbook and her courage. She opened it, showing a drawing of the chapel people gathered music notes floating into the sky, and at the center, a janitor with a mop, standing next to a grand piano. Lena spoke into the mic. This place used to be quiet, not the good kind, the lonely kind. But now, it's full of echoes that make you feel seen. She looked at Jack. "And I want to thank my dad for teaching me that being broken doesn't mean you stop creating. It just means you make different music." The crowd went still. Then came a standing ovation. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Jack sat at the old piano alone for a moment. Celia walked up quietly, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling apple cider. "For the maestro," she said, handing him one. He raised it in mock toast to outliving the mop jokes. She laughed, then grew serious. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that night in the auditorium? If you'd let them laugh and just walked away?" He ran a hand over the smooth keys. "Every day," he said. "But I think the real miracle wasn't that I spoke. It's that someone listened." Celia leaned against the piano. "I think we're all waiting to be heard. Sometimes we just don't know what we sound like anymore." Jack looked up at her eyes steady. "You brought me back to music. But more than that, you reminded me how to be brave quietly." She didn't answer with words. She just reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small square velvet box. Jack blinked. "Before you panic," she said quickly. "It's not what you think." She opened it. Inside was a vintage metronome, polished wood engraved on the side. "To the man who made time meaningful again." Jack exhaled, touched beyond words. He ran his fingers over the inscription, voice thick. I thought I was keeping time, but I was just surviving. Celia smiled. And now he looked around the chapel, the community, Lena laughing with her friends, the gentle hum of new life blooming. Now he said, I think I'm playing the life I always hoped for. As the final moment of the night approached, Jack took the stage one last time. He stood alone, the lights low, the hush in the air almost sacred. I've been called a janitor, a teacher, a single dad, a broken man. He paused. But tonight, I just want to be a song. He sat and began to play a piece he'd written the week before, not for Rachel, not for grief, not for survival, but for what came after. The melody was simple, honest, filled with pauses that spoke louder than crescendos, and somewhere near the middle a gentle phrase repeated like a heartbeat, constant, unafraid. As the final note faded, there was no applause at first, just stillness. Then a tearful standing ovation that seemed to stretch beyond the room. Later that night, in the quiet of the music room, Lena sat curled up on the rug, drawing again. Celia was thumbing through an old hymn book, pausing to hum a tune she hadn't dared sing in years. Jack poured tea in 3 mismatched mugs, smiling at the strange, beautiful family he never saw coming. I don't know how we got here, he said softly. Celia looked up. You followed the music, she said, even when it stopped making sense. Lena chimed in without looking up, and then you made your own. And so the janitor with the broken heart, the CEO with the silent hands, and the daughter who believed in second chances stayed. They stayed in the music. They stayed with each other. They stayed in the kind of love that isn't loud but lasts. Because some stories don't end, they just change key. And when they do, they finally sound like home. If this story touched your heart even just a little, take a moment. Breathe it in. Because sometimes the most powerful symphonies are born from silence, and the most extraordinary lives begin with the courage to start again. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of Jack and Celia's journey resonated with you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your words inspire more than you know. If you believe in stories that heal, uplift, and remind us of the quiet strength in everyday people, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. Your time, your presence, your kindness, they mean the world. Until the next story, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop listening.